There we are recording.
Exciting.
So this is the fourth episode in the What If I Didn't Need to Be Ill series. And basically it's just come about because I want to share. I know so many people that have overcome illnesses and pain and things like that I just wanted to share their stories, because I know that, like, when you're suffering and it feels like there's nothing you can do about it, that's not a very nice place to be. So I just wanted to share other people's stories about how they've overcome things, to show that, to give a little bit of hope, if that makes sense. So David, we were talking, and we've known each other for over a year now, haven't we? And when we were talking the other day, you mentioned about your chronic fatigue, and so that's why I ended up inviting you onto this, because I was hoping that you'd share a bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much. Just start off, just maybe. So yeah, I used to have chronic fatigue, and I had it for a couple of years, and now I don't have chronic fatigue anymore. So I guess that's the first thing to say. And that, what I mean by that is, I can get a little sleep and do a full day's work, and then it not really impact me, or I can work out fully, or I can do the things that I guess people who don't think they have chronic fatigue can do. And then, as part of that kind of process of then learning to overcome fatigue myself and work with pain, I now also work with people, helping them overcome fatigue and pain. And I really like what Victoria said, because it's all about hope is the first piece. And without hope or the possibility that you think you can heal, there's not that much chance that you will. But if you can have hope, it kind of opens the door to things changing. So I guess the place to start would maybe be how I got ill and being at rock bottom, because I really want to stress that I was in a very bad place, both physically and mentally, and now I'm not at all. Now I have a life that I really enjoy, and lots of lightness and stuff in it. So it kind of started. I was volunteering in Africa with some street children who are wonderful. We play football, but I picked up a really bad amoeba, and it was undiagnosed, and I had a severe stomach infection. And then, unluckily, I went to Zizi's 3 months later and had a prawn pizza, and had again another bout of severe food poisoning. And then 5 months after that, I went to a festival, and I got a vomit and diarrhea virus. And it seemed the combination of these two things just had a very severe impact on my stomach, and it stopped kind of working properly. And I'd always been prone to being anxious and overthinking things, and I definitely overthought that. And they said it's IBS, and I was like, well, my stomach doesn't work. And they're like, well, it's IBS. And that didn't really help. So I got more and more anxious. And as I got more anxious, I began, after a period, to get fatigue and to feel tired, and to then have flu-type symptoms. And over time, over the period of about a year, I would say, my life completely fell apart. I went from being at university studying English literature with a girlfriend who I really loved, friends who I really liked, feeling really pretty confident myself, doing a lot in the university scene, to having to move into my parents who lived in Africa, to move to Africa. Had 2 hours energy a day to do things like wash and eat, and then I would just lie on my bed.
So this was all a result of just deteriorating health.
all a result of deteriorating. Yeah, so physically, I had literally 2 hours energy a day. Otherwise, I would feel horrific and just incredibly fatigued. And I also had a selection of other really fun symptoms, like flu-type symptoms and experiences where my whole system would feel like it was crashing. I'd have to lie down on the bed in the dark. It was pretty shit. It was terrible. And I kind of lost everything. I lost my girlfriend, and at the time I lost my degree, and I lost all my friends, and I lost my sense of self. It all just kind of imploded. And as it imploded, I got more and more anxious because it became a bigger and bigger threat. You've got chronic fatigue, and we don't know what we can do about this, and you're probably going to have to manage it for the rest of your life, was the message I got from the doctor.
Yeah.
So I was just, looking back on it now, I feel really calm about it. But at the time, I'd sit on the bathroom floor and cry and say I didn't know what to do. And I felt completely hopeless a lot of the time. But that said, actually, in hindsight, there were still times where I did feel hope, and I would laugh and smile, but I didn't really realize that happened. I only realized the horror of the really strong thoughts I had the rest of the time.
I don't know if this is the same for you, but like my experience of the people that I've worked with is that even when you're feeling better, or you're feeling like you've got a bit more energy, and you start to do something, that can quickly all fall away.
Yeah, exactly. And often start to do something and you get tired, but also you'd be really scared of doing something.
Yeah.
Because you didn't want to make it worse. And I'd heard things like, well, the longer you're ill, the longer it'll take to get better. So I was like, can't make it worse. I think. Yeah, I just wanted to emphasize how dark a place I was, because I got to a place where I was anxious about everything. I used to joke that I was batshit crazy because I was anxious how to listen to music, anxious how to sleep, anxious about everything, because my whole life kind of had been impacted so dramatically by this. It became such a gigantic threat that I was just a complete mess. And the iller I got, the more anxious I became. Yeah. And the more, because it was like, this is a bigger and bigger threat. What do I do? I don't know. Okay.
So were you trying to manage everything?
Trying to manage everything. I'd heard you had to, only do very small amounts of exercise and build up very slowly, pacing, and manage everything, anxious about everything. And then, sorry, go ahead. And then my mum Googled chronic fatigue, and I went to a clinic in London called the Optimum Health Clinic, who have a good record of helping people recover from chronic fatigue. And they taught me some really, really interesting things. They taught me about the healing state, that the more we can be a bit at ease, then that puts us in a much better place to heal. And our bodies do heal just naturally when we're in that healing state. So that was quite a new idea for me. Okay, so if I can allow, my body could heal. I still found it really hard because I had all this anxious thinking, but it was still a helpful idea. It also taught me that you can get tired and wired, that through being really stressed, which a lot of people with chronic fatigue experience, they get really anxious or down or whatever, that can create kind of a tired, wired feeling where you're tired because you're anxious or because you're stressed, and that's what's creating the stress. But it becomes a really vicious cycle because you're, oh no, I've got fatigue, and that creates the feeling of fatigue. And
I think it's also like when your stress responses are on, like it is a reaction of the body to shut everything else down and
exactly
focus on that kind of flight or fight response, isn't it?
Yeah, and you can get into kind of a almost a state where you're constantly in a stress state, which then impairs bodily systems. But the good news is they can go back online once you begin to respond in a slightly more relaxed way. It's like they've gone offline, but they can go back online. that's the hope. That's the thing that I find. Yeah. But yeah, at the time, it had a very physical impact on me, being in that state of mind. But just seeing that, just making sense, and they talked about psychology, and for me, that was like, this is weird, because it was like, this isn't psychological, this is physical. That the symptoms I had were crippling. They were horrific, but they made me kind of understand that could be as a result of these stress patterns that I was running, that could be keeping my body in this state that was creating the fatigue. And they even sowed this seed that was very challenging for me initially, that some of these patterns, these stress responses, could be creating this tired, wired feeling in itself. And that was like, really? But I was kind of open to it, but they very much stressed that your fatigue is real. Because a lot of people with chronic fatigue would have had the experience when like a loved one's like, yeah, but just kind of shake yourself out of it, or and I had someone do that to me, and I just couldn't. It was crippling.
So what started to change for you?
Interesting. I mean, they taught me different techniques and methods of beginning to work on some of these patterns, and it made sense to me, just personally, to begin to try to work on the response to these symptoms. Because I was like, if I'm responding to them in a stressed way, then that's going to make them worse. And to put it so simply, I mean, they did it through different methods, but it was like the understanding that if I could become more accepting of where I was and respond to my symptoms in a more relaxed way, which may sound easier said than done, then that could enable me to heal, or enable the kind of psychological element of the symptoms to settle down. But actually at the time I thought they were purely physical. So that was a big part. But then I had a very fascinating experience which really opened my eyes to how much my mind was playing a role in this. And that was one of my symptoms, was I described as flu-like. I'd get hot and clammy, and it would be so uncomfortable. It was like having flu. And I used to have viral infections, or I had them in the past, and it reminded me of that. So I was in Africa, and I came back for Christmas, and I realized that it was essentially an anxious response to heat. I would get hot, and I'd get anxious about being hot, and it would become cripplingly uncomfortable. And it felt like flu, and I get really clammy. But I actually saw it was like a sensitivity to heat. So at this, I was like, this is exciting. So I moved from Uganda to England, and my parents had a house in England, and some friends of mine lived in the house and cared for me for rent. And I began to see, and I began to respond to this heat differently. And at times it would fall away, and I would just be hot rather than having these flu type symptoms. And I was like, wow, this is opening up my mind. So that, I was like, okay, my mind is playing a role. The symptom was crippling, but my mind, this stress response to heat was what was creating it. And I was like, exciting. I was exciting and hopeful some of the time. But then I used to have these crashes, which was like, I would start to feel a feeling of fatigue in my body. It would start to build and build and build and build and build until I had to lie down in my bed and just lie there for hours with the lights on. And then it occurred to me, well, what if there's a response to that that's making it worse? So I remember standing by a washing machine, being like, beginning to get it. And I just realized that there was this really stressed response to it. And I was able for a moment to let it go just by seeing that as thought, essentially. And then I'm left with a feeling of like really scary fatigue, but I didn't crash. And so then I began to see, it's my response to it that's making a not nice feeling of fatigue, a crash. And And then some of the time I'd crash, but over time I began to be able to like not crash. And there was another time by a washing line that was quite a seminal moment. I was putting out washing, I began to get the feeling of fatigue, and I'm like, crash. And I just went, okay, response. And I just really let myself be with it. And again, I was just like, it was really shaky at first, but I didn't crash. So it was kind of quite extraordinary for me. But I was really lucky because it all made sense. Because I'd studied anxiety, I'd been interested in psychology, and I remember putting the symptoms of fatigue and anxiety next to each other and seeing how similar they are. And
The symptoms of what? Sorry.
Chronic fatigue and anxiety. So
Yeah.
I could see how the anxiety could be keeping you in a stress state, keeping you ill. The anxiety could be making the symptoms worse. If that made sense to me, I was like, I know that anxiety. I know that when you're scared of a tiger, it's not the tiger making you feel scared. It's your anxious response to the tiger making you feel scared. And anxiety is designed to make you feel uncomfortable about what you're anxious about. So you're designed to be like, feel anxious about the tiger. So kind of I had this theoretical understanding that anxiety is designed to make me feel really uncomfortable. So it could be, if I'm getting anxious about symptoms, they're going to get much, much worse.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to be getting uncomfortable about being hot. I'm going to get uncomfortable about getting fatigued, or even have a crash, which was like a panic, like attack about fatigue. I can go on, but do you have any questions so far?
Well, so I'm getting, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm getting this sense that as you started to see the role your anxiety was playing, that your symptoms still there, but you wouldn't get the same crashes that you did before, so they weren't having as big an impact. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. And even so the flu type symptom fell away. It just became I'd get hot sometimes. It just vanished. It wasn't a problem. And the crash I saw as one of my biggest symptoms. So that was like a symptom kind of knocked off the list. What I was left with was kind of an underlying feeling of fatigue quite often. And I had started to have a bit more energy and do a bit more, which was exciting. But essentially, I still had this underlying level of fatigue there. And then I had a really incredible mind-blowing experience that actually showed me that even that my mind was playing a massive role in. And
so talk to us about.
Yeah, so that was really interesting. So I was living with these people caring for me, and it was my friend's birthday. So I saved up my few hours energy a day. I didn't do anything all day. I didn't get out of bed. Just there. And then I made cocktails for him. I knew how to make a mojito. So I was making mojitos. And I just started to drink them. I'm not advising anyone to do this if they are not unwell, but I started to drink them. I had a couple of drinks. And it must have settled down my mind. Because quite quickly I was like, I felt okay. And I went out to a kind of a bar club with my friend. And then I'm there and I don't have fatigue. And at the time I didn't think about it. I was like, this is amazing. What is going on? And I didn't have fatigue. So this fatigue I'd had for years just wasn't there. And I end up dancing with people, and I end up talking to a girl who I really liked, who I'd never met before. Well, I met her once, and she'd seen me in a cafe, and she came up and spoke to me, and we had a wonderful chat. And I was dancing with her friends, and invited everyone back to my house to have a party. I mean, it sounds insane, because the fatigue before was crippling, and it just wasn't there. And I, ended up being in bed with her, and we ended up having a nice time together and waking up, and there was a beautiful connection between us. It was really there. There was an obvious connection. And we get up in the morning, no fatigue, walk into the bus stop. I can remember putting on my sunglasses, sunny, very present. It's my mind was calm, so I didn't have fatigue.
Did you not wonder where it had gone?
No, not really. I mean, this is the odd thing. No, which is so funny. But I got back, and then I was like, oh, where's it gone? And I started to get it again. and but it opened my eyes. It's like, okay, my fatigue is being created, I don't know how yet, by my mind's response instantaneously in the moment. And I heard stories about people going to do certain psychological interventions, who'd go into these psychological interventions, and this didn't happen to everyone, it only happened to a small percentage of people, it seemed, go into it for a weekend, and they'd been bedbound for years, and they'd leave and they didn't have fatigue. And I was like, how? And this made sense of it. It's like, my mind is creating this somehow. I mean, the fatigue is real. I'm going to completely stress that. It was horrible and crippling, but my mind was creating it. So then I began to see that what I would do is I'd get tired and I'd get anxious unconsciously about being tired.
Yeah.
And that would make the tiredness much, 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 much stronger. And I would actually start to yawn more, and like all these things that you think, oh, it's tiredness making this happen. But it wasn't, it was my response to it. And I began to see that, and then it was less of a problem. And then I had other symptoms of fatigue. I used to have a really uncomfortable feeling around my eyes. I realized I was having an unconscious response to that, and I began to respond in a relaxed way to that, and that began to fall away. So over a 4-month period, I'd go through phases. When I was with this girl, I didn't have fatigue. Just I'd only be with her for a few hours at a time. I'd be present and happy and confident. It's like, what? And then I'd go back into my anxious thinking, and then I'd feel fatigue.
Sorry, I just had images then of doctors prescribing girls.
I know, I wish. I wish. But I was still quite anxious as well. But I just began to see this, and I kept getting compelled by it. I mean, no, this is physical, this is real, because it felt physical. It didn't look psychological. It was physical, and I'm confident if you looked at my brain that when I was in that response, you'd be able to see that the fatigue was being created. But it was the response creating it. It wasn't to me.
A condition.
Wasn't a condition. I think there may have been some underlying fatigue due to, my system being in a not good place, in a tired, wired state. But I think that was very, very small. And so 4 months later, I ended up cycling, and I just realized I didn't have fatigue anymore. It's gone.
To go back from where you said you were, and you didn't have the energy, like to get through 2 hours in a day, to clubbing all night and cycling, and that's a huge shift, isn't it?
It's absolutely massive. Yeah, I mean, it's giant, and yeah, and to be in such an incredibly bad place, and then and to kind of have insights and realizations and understanding that just let me have a completely different experience of life was just so helpful.
So stop me if I'm jumping ahead too much. Like, what is it like now?
Yeah.
Your symptoms.
So now. I don't have any chronic fatigue symptoms.
You don't get tired?
I get tired, but I mean, I get tired if I haven't had a good night's sleep, and then I have a good night's sleep and I feel fine the next day. Or I just don't think about it as fatigue, so it's not a problem. There have been moments where I've started with, oh no, I'm tired, and I get more tired again. But I also I made sure on this journey that I had good nutrition, and I put those building blocks in place, because I think I don't want people to think I'm saying it's just in your mind to push through. To me, there's very much a spectrum, but for me, it was so much was coming from my mind that I just got to a point where I knew my fatigue was being created by my mind in the moment, by stress and anxiety patterns. So once I was over them, it's like I don't have chronic fatigue anymore, because that's what was creating it.
And you saw that for yourself, didn't you? You had direct experiences where you could see that there was something in you that was making it worse.
It wasn't even just making it worse, it was creating most of the symptoms. I'd say, I mean, to me, 99, I don't know. There may have been a tiny bit of actual fatigue, but in that once I stopped doing those anxious symptoms, that seemed to pass in a day or two. It just wasn't a problem. It was like, it was all being created by these stress responses. So I would have these direct experiences where I would see that and they would pass and the fatigue wouldn't be there, like the night out or many other experiences following it. And yeah, it was through seeing it for myself. It was like, oh yeah, well, I don't have fatigue here, but I do here. What's happening? Oh, I'm anxious here and I'm not anxious here. Okay. Like, it was kind of like that simple, really. But it took time for that to bed in, because it was like, no, but it can't be true. And it would feel so crippling. So I'd be like, I'd almost have to prove it to myself. I'd be like, okay, let go of this thinking and see what happens.
So what I'm wondering, like, if there's anybody currently like suffering from chronic fatigue syndrome that's listening to this now and hasn't kind of had an inkling before that that there's an internal sort of anxious component to this as well, that's seen it as like a physical condition that they can't get away from. Because I know you work with people that have got it. Sort of, how would you lead them through that process of seeing something for themselves that could help?
I think, yeah, that's a very good question. I think understanding there are certain components that may be at play in fatigue is very helpful. So we've been talking a lot, because this was true for me, that my symptoms were created by anxious and stressed responses to ordinary bodily sensations in the moment, and these happen unconsciously. So on one end of the spectrum, symptoms can be purely created by getting stressed and anxious about bodily sensations and things you might not be aware of. So if I can get someone to really understand that, and they may be a very challenging concept for them at first, then that's a really key piece. Key piece to understand how that might work. And we may talk a bit about the science a bit later. I would like to do that with you at some point. But understanding the possibility, that's a big piece. But then you've got a spectrum. So obviously some people may have underlying fatigue for being in a stressed or anxious state, or there may be other factors at play. So there may be some physical healing that needs to take place. Okay. Now, so if people can understand a healing state, that they can get, okay, so if I respond in a relaxed way to my symptoms, if I can begin to let go of anxious thinking, not only could those symptoms vanish on the extreme, on the other end of the spectrum, I'd be in more of a healing state for the physical side of things to heal. So if there's a physical component and I'm more at ease at where I am, or accepting of my fatigue, can let go of anxious or stressed thinking about it, then I'm going to be in a much better place to heal. And my body is designed to heal and can heal. So I would really, get them to understand that there's an incredible capacity in the body to heal the physical. And then there may be a spectrum where it could be that some of your symptoms are completely created by anxious and stress responses. Or in the middle, it could be that some physical symptoms, where there's some physical damage, are being massively exacerbated by getting stressed or anxious. Because if you cut yourself and get really worried about being cut yourself, it's going to cause you much more suffering than if you're at ease with it.
And what I've noticed as well, that like when people are suffering from chronic fatigue, there is that temptation to get really frustrated. But like it's so easy, like when you're not able to do the things that you want to do. It's very frustrating, and that anxious, stressed state can almost seem automatic. It's yeah.
Yeah, it can and it can seem like that that creates your feelings. But what is interesting for me is that we often have very different experiences of being in a bad place or having really bad fatigue or being in lots of pain. So some of the time I could be quite matter of fact and kind of optimistic about it. And other times I'd be completely freaking out. And what this points towards for me is it's our thoughts about the fatigue in the moment that creates our experience of it. So I was speaking to someone who's had fatigue for like 20 years, and we did our first session together, and we kind of asked her this exact question. She's like, yeah, sometimes I get so mad about it, and other times I don't. And I was like, well, what this points towards is the fact that actually we have different experiences of our symptoms because we're thinking differently about it already. And some people, some practitioners, and I do sometimes with clients use techniques on these responses, but rarely now, because I actually see that if people really see that, it's my stress responses, it's my thinking about it, creating it, they can have a different response naturally. When I had these insights, I would be seeing, it's my response. I really saw that, and that allowed me to have a different response to it. It kind of happened. Didn't have to work on it.
It's just a tiny different way of looking at it, isn't it? But it's a huge distinction from I'm like this because I've got chronic fatigue and it's been done to me, to realizing that actually how you're thinking about it in the moment, how you're relating to it, is causing that experience.
Yeah. And just talking a bit more about the healing might be good, because some people are like, yeah, but I've been like this for a long time, I can't heal.
Yeah.
And there's the amazing capacity for the body to heal the physical component of fatigue and pain. So people now are becoming more and more like curious about how is it that some people with really kind of difficult or put in other words, illnesses that should kill them quickly don't. So there's actually doctors in the NHS whose expertise in looking at stage 4 cancer remission. So people who are kind of, in most doctors' eyes, should die quite quickly, but don't. They live on for much longer, for months and even years. What's happening there? How are they living longer? And doctors are becoming like, they're just looking into this. They're looking into how come people can heal from things we think that they shouldn't. There's actually a project called the Spontaneous Remission Project, where they can look at all the cases of people who've recovered from illnesses in a way that you wouldn't expect. And there's incredible capacity within us to heal. It's built into us already. And if we begin to get out of its way, just allow this capacity, which often means dropping the stressed and anxious and angry thinking that gets out of its way, things can happen that we can't imagine. And there's just, it's like a bit of a different perception. But there's a doctor called Dr. Rankin, and she is fascinated with this, because she says we have this perception in our society that we get given drugs and that heals us. And occasionally that's true, but most of the time get given a drug, or you even put like the right nutrition in place, but then that allows the body to heal. That allows what it will do naturally. And she beautifully talks about her daughter. She says that when she gives her daughter a tablet, she says, "We're giving you this tablet to help your body heal."
Dr. Rankin is that the lady that wrote Mind Over Matter?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah.
But it's kind of in the work that I do with people, it's just and all the things like that I've looked into, and the biochemistry and just the way our body is a perfect system, and it's always working towards our health. It's just like even from when people get like colds or coughs and think that they're suffering, it's like, well, no, that's the body's way of expelling like things that are dangerous to it. And you see it as in something as simple as a cut or a bone mending, and it's just it's just remarkable. This,
and that we accidentally get in its way. That's the thing. It's like we think, how am I going to do this? And if we can just get out of its way, it can do incredible things. And the placebo effect is a brilliant example of this. Every drug that you've ever taken has been in a trial where a certain percentage, often it's 20 or 30% of people have had improvement through placebo, through an inert pill or an inert injection. And one really good theory, I think, of why this happens is when someone takes a placebo, often they will believe they will get better. If you believe you will get better, you will expect to get better. If you expect to get better, you could let go of all the stress thinking you're doing and just be. So then you heal, because your body heals because you're not in its way. So much of a stress state. So there is this incredible capacity, and I know someone who recovered from chronic fatigue in their 70s. I work with quite a few women in their kind of mid to late 50s, and seen people recover, and there is hope for people to heal. One thing I just want to say about this is that people might think, well, I've got to get really relaxed. You don't. I wasn't really relaxed. I was still quite anxious. And if you can just become a bit more at ease, like a few percent, that can really help. And the metaphor for this is if you've got a tanker, you began to weigh it down with kind of containers, and those containers are your kind of being in more of a stress response. And then the tanker goes below the surface of the water because you're weighing it down so much. You don't need to take off all the containers for it to begin to rise. You just take off a bit. So you can just be like, the more you become at ease, even if it's a few percent, one, that can build on itself, but two, that will help.
Just love that. Because a lot of the time, like when you work with people, you see how sort of hard on themselves they are, and it's as though we're brought up through life kind of thinking that the last person we have to look after is ourselves. We give ourselves the hardest time, and it's an amazing kind of, and what I like about what you shared today, it is some of the science or explanation for kind of why being easier on yourself and being more, just even if it's a tiny bit more like loving or accepting of whatever's going on, can have such a huge impact.
Yeah, and yeah. Do we have time for me to talk a bit about back pain? That's a question I have. I don't know how we're doing for time.
Let's have a look. Let's carry on, and we'll do you have like 5 or 10 minutes? Is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, it might not even be that. But yeah, probably about that.
Yeah.
Because
So just say how that's linked to.
Yeah. So I was always fascinated with, like, partly how could my symptoms have been created by my mind in the moment, and how could they have felt so crippling? It kind of made sense, as I discussed a bit, the anxious response, making things more uncomfortable and keeping them in your awareness, making ordinary bodily sensations horrible.
Yeah.
And then maybe even like the little bit of underlying fatigue, making it 10 times stronger. That was kind of my theory. But this year I've come across like lots of research being done into pain that has kind of given me a clearer understanding of potentially what was happening in me. Because really in the last 20 or 25 years, we've learned more about pain than we have in the last 1,000. Because we have MRIs and we can scan the brain and we can do experiments and see things that we couldn't do before we have brain imaging. And what we did have was kind of a belief that the pain is created in the body and the mind doesn't play that much of a role. And now that's shifting. So I was really lucky. I injured my back. It's the luckiest injury I ever got, I think. I was doing kettlebells and I injured my back, and because I did it just slightly wrong, tweaked and injured my back. I went to see a physio, and this physio was brilliant. She got me kind of, we're doing physio twice a day, and we really worked on the physical side of things. And after a period of time, about 4 months, she was like, "It should be better now. Your muscles by this period of time should have healed, but you're still in pain. So what I want you to do is start to gradually do a little bit, and don't worry that you're in a little bit of pain, because what can happen is when we've been injured, when you've had an injury that's kind of been a bit chronic, your mind can lock onto the pain or even keep creating it when there's no longer an injury there." I was like, "Really? Can it?" And she was like, "Yeah, just trust me." And she talked through the science, a bit of it. So I'll do a bit more in a minute. And she got me just to gradually increase my exercise. So I gradually began to increase what I was doing. And I would still get a bit of pain, but it didn't get any worse. The pain stayed the same. I was just, this is interesting. So in a really safe way, I just started to do a bit more, a bit more, and a bit more. And the pain just kind of stayed the same. And because I had this physio going, "Look, it's fine, don't worry about it," I didn't worry about it. And at the same time, I noticed I'd had some of the same patterns I had with my fatigue. I'd be like, what do I do about this kind of anxious thinking? And when I let that go, that pain would come and go more easily. And I was like, so my mind's doing something here as well. This is fishy. So I gradually increased it, listening to my body's intelligence. Because I think when we are calmer and clearer, there is an intelligence to our body. We can know what's good for us. I think that is really there, and listening to that's really helpful. But I kept increasing it. It didn't get worse. It wasn't that bad. The pain remained. Kept increasing it until I was doing like a full weight workout. And it wasn't a problem. Kept doing this for a few months, and about a month, and then the pain just vanished. It just disappeared. It just wasn't there anymore. It's like my mind had seen that my back wasn't in threat anymore, so it stopped creating the pain. And I was like, And I think if I hadn't seen this physio, I could still have that back pain now, because I was really worried about how I was sitting and getting stressed about my posture. And good posture is important, but getting worried about it can really like lock in that pain. And then I was really interested. I was like, "Where did you get this understanding from?" And she said, "Well, there's a physical therapist who then has become a professor of neuroscience. And he's worked at Oxford. And he runs 2 big research teams in Australia. His name is Professor Lormier Mosley. And he's doing lots of research into pain. And so I watched some videos. There's some videos on YouTube on him, and he's got some good books. But I read a book of his, and he said something that just kind of blew my mind slightly. He said that pain is 100% of the time created in the brain, no exceptions. And I was like, "Really?" And he said, oh yeah, and that's why sometimes you could like have a cut, you know, you're gardening or you're playing football, and you don't notice you've got a cut because you're really focused on that thing. Because your mind weighs up, oh, it's not that much damage and this is important, so I'm not going to create the pain. And you, you even hear stories, you know, when it's like someone's child and they don't get pain because they're saving their child. Saving their child is more important. So the mind's like, I'm not going to create pain now because I want you, because saving my child is much more important than my injury, even if it's really severe.
I had a tiny inkling of this once. I was on a walk, and we were walking down kind of a bridle path, but it was absolutely full of mud. So we were holding on to the trees and the hedges at the side, and kind of like trying to walk along the slope at the side. And when we got to the end of the bridle path, I realised that I'd been cut all down my arm by the thorns and everything. Like I'd not felt it all the way down because we were concentrating so much on like trying not to slip in the mud. And I looked at it and I was like, blimey, like I'm surprised that didn't hurt, kind of thing. And for a second I was like, oh, that must be like thought created, kind of. And then it just didn't hurt because it didn't make sense to, like, because it and for a second it just made so much sense that like it hadn't hurt because I'd not noticed it. And
yeah, and it would be almost on a deeper level than that. Your mind had decided not to make it hurt because other things were a priority. This is what's fascinating. It's almost not even just noticing. It's like that if your mind had decided where you've been cut was really in danger and it was more important than what you're doing, it would create pain.
Pay attention to me.
Yeah, it would be like, yeah, pay attention to me, because pain is a protective device. You know, your mind wants you to change your behavior, so it creates pain to get you to change your behavior. That's kind of the theory, right? And what this means is that you've got sensors throughout your body sending your mind information of what's happening in your body. But they aren't pain sensors. They're like sensors that detect changes in heat, pressure, and also ones that measure potential danger. And they send signals to the brain, and the brain goes, how dangerous is this? And if it thinks it's dangerous, it will create pain. Now, most of the time, that system works really well. You know, you get a cut, you feel pain. But some of the time with chronic injuries, or when someone's got really stressed about being in pain, the pain system can begin to kind of be off kilter, as it were. It can begin to keep creating pain where there's no longer physical damage there. You know, there are examples of this, you know, like my back's an example. You know, it was after where my muscles should have healed, but I was still getting pain. Lots of examples, people get pain in parts of their body and they have scans and there's like nothing there. There are many, many examples of this. So you can have pain when there's no damage at all. And like phantom limb pain is a brilliant example. You know, people don't have a limb anymore, they still get agonizing pain in their hand. And I remember reading a really good story about this. It's like someone had been dragged under a car and they had a really severely injured foot. And in the experience, when their foot got injured, that was the most painful part, was that it was their foot. The point in their foot was agonizing, but they ended up losing their leg. And when they get phantom limb pain, the pain they get is where on the foot they got dragged under the car. And it's agonizing pain. It's, you know, when people get phantom limb pain, it's excruciating. So, and it's like, it's from memory, or they don't exactly know. They know, but all it just shows is you can have no limb and have pain. You can have no damage and have pain. But the pain is completely real. My back really hurt. You know, it's like, I have to stress. I'm not saying the pain isn't real. It's completely real. It would almost definitely show up in brain scans. But if we've got caught into a chronic pain state and we've responded to it in a stressed way, that can send the signal to our mind, this is a problem, you need to create pain.
So do you work with people that are suffering from pain as well then?
I do, yes. Yeah, I do. And yeah, again, very, very interesting things, patterns seem to emerge. I was working with someone recently and they get bad migraines. And what I started to see was they would start to get kind of anxious about the pain. They'd get a sensation in their neck and they begin to get anxious about the sensation in their neck. And then at some point they'd get a migraine, they begin to get anxious about the migraine. And at some point the migraine would get worse and it would build and build and build and build. And when they begin to respond to it in a relaxed way, the migraine can pass much more easily. Because on a brain level, what's happening, if you get stressed about, oh no, I'm getting a headache, and it could be conscious or unconscious, that sends the message to the brain, your brain's really in threat, your head's really in threat, you're getting it, so therefore it creates more pain. Because it's like, if it thinks your limb's in threat, it will create pain. So if you start to go, oh no, my arm injury, that sends the message, this is a problem. And that in itself can lead the mind to creating pain when there's no actual damage there anymore. But I find it very exciting that through understanding kind of pain, this new understanding of pain, how to respond to it differently, that people can manage their pain better, or sometimes the pain itself can pass. And there's research to back this up, to say that there are people statistically manage the pain better, or it can like improve the pain for them. Yeah.
So I'm just, what would you encourage people to do then? If people were, we'll share your details before we finish.
Sure.
Definitely in case people want to get in touch. But if someone's watched this and they're curious to like see something for themselves or experiment a little bit for themselves, what would you kind of encourage they look for or get a sense of?
Yeah. Firstly, being open to the possibility what I'm saying could be true, because it could be very challenging for a lot of people. Like, what you say, my pain's not real, and that's not what I'm saying. But it can sound like that, because the pain would be crippling. But the first thing is, or the second thing is, just to experiment, see what happens, reflect. Is my pain always the same? What happens when I'm able to respond to it in a more relaxed way? That happens. And then see, that can be a really big piece. Like, just look at your own experience. Does my pain change? And potentially just see if you can respond to it in a more relaxed way. Thirdly, I think understanding it can be very helpful. So Lormier Moseley is a good place to start. The more you understand, often it can help have a better relationship. You can end up having a better relationship to the pain, or you can respond to it in a more relaxed way because you understand it. And I guess the last thing is, taking action does help. So again, there's research saying passive coping strategies, okay, my pain or my fatigue is just going to get better. Like, doesn't work as well as active kind of coping or recovering strategies when we take action and do things. And that could be learning to respond to your pain or your fatigue in a more relaxed way. That could be nutrition. That could be kind of across the board. But I guess the last thing I would say is there's real hope for people now. There's hope because if you can understand, like, your mind and body can heal. That's huge. And if you can understand that my pain is maybe more complex than I understand, and there could be a psychological component, that also offers the potential for change, because for most people, they haven't been seeing it like that. And if they can see it like that, all things could change.
I find that kind of the biggest factor in change is that curiosity. You know, like, oh, I wonder if I wonder if I can do something about this. I wonder if it always has to be like that. And just a moment that sort of the present doesn't seem as certain. It's kind of like you don't know where that's going to lead, but you've got nothing to lose really in trying either, in playing, in noticing, in. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, it's been great. Thank you very much
for sharing. And if somebody does want to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that?
Oh yeah, so I have a website which is www.david-bowerman.com. I also have an email address which is david-bowerman at I've forgotten my email address. I'll just give you my other one. It says Bowerman, BOWERMAN _David at yahoo.co.uk.
Brilliant.
Just send me an email there.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, well, thank you.
And hopefully we'll talk again soon.